Hi, I'm Dr. Ashley Foe, and this is my colleague, Dr. Gerard Eisenberg from University Hospitals Cleveland Medical Center. Both of us are active endoscopists and members of the ASGE. We've developed careers in gastrointestinal endoscopy thanks to our mentor and the mentor of many endoscopists around the globe, a true pioneer and giant in our chosen discipline, Schindler awardee, Dr. Michael V. Sivak, Jr. Mike, it's a pleasure to welcome you back from a very successful retirement to University Hospitals and Cleveland. Let me start off with your early years growing up in Erie, Pennsylvania. I know your father was a physician, and I know your siblings also went into medicine. How did your childhood influence you, and did it play a role in your choice of careers?
Well, first, let me say it's very nice to see the two of you, and I'm happy to see that you've turned out so well, because I remember at the time there was some question about that, but you've both done extremely well, and very, very proud of you. Erie, Pennsylvania, that's a long time ago. I guess when I was growing up, there was never any question that I wouldn't go into medicine. So, and my dad was a doctor. He was an ophthalmologist. Actually, he was ophthalmology ENT because in the early 40s when he started, they were all sort of sandwiched together. But anyway, he was the first, and then came his brothers, and then I have two brothers that are physicians, actually one and a half because one's a psychiatrist. And I have four cousins who are doctors, and there's a whole bunch of nurses scattered in there. It's all very disgusting. But to answer your question, I just never thought about anything else.
So tell us about your start in medicine. Was gastroenterology a subspecialty at the time, and how did you end up sort of latching on to endoscopy?
Yeah, I saw that question. Was gastroenterology a subspecialty? I'm old, but I'm not that old. Yes, it was a subspecialty. It existed. How did I pick GI? Well, that's pretty interesting. And it's kind of revealing, I guess. I went to the library at what was then Philadelphia General Hospital, and I looked up all of the various textbooks on all of the subspecialties in medicine. I think I could have been a good surgeon. I was really good at that in medical school, but it was kind of foreordained, I guess, that I was going into medicine. So anyway, I got all of the various subspecialty textbooks. And I found Baucus's textbook, which at the time I think was 3 volumes. And the thing that impressed me about GI is it had way more organs than anybody else. And I thought, and I had no idea about endoscopy at the time, but I thought, this is much more interesting than just cardiology. It's one organ. Things are pretty much cut and dried with, nephrology. It's all, but GI, pretty big. So I was impressed by the size of Baucus's textbook, and that's literally how I chose GI.
Well, I know that you're a amazing musician and aspiring composer, as well as a amateur astronomer. How did those influences or those hobbies influence what you do in endoscopy?
Music I hated until I got into high school, and I met my first clarinet teacher, and threw a scare into my father, who thought I was going to be a musician. But I've done that all my life with various interruptions, like for medical school was that sort of shut down the music for a while, and various other things. But
what was the name of your band?
It was the Mike Sivak Orchestra when I was in high school. When I was at Cleveland Clinic, as a fellow, we had a doctor's band, and the name of that one was the Arrhythmias. But we were pretty good. I would bring in some of my other musician friends, and we would populate the various chairs and play dances and stuff for the clinic. But anyway, astronomy I don't do much anymore, because West Virginia, where I live now, is not very conducive to astronomy. But as you know, I own a lot of books. You can never have too many books. do a lot of reading. Stock market keeps me busy and so forth. So I don't know. Did that answer your question? Your question.
How did that influence your career in endoscopy?
Well, you know, I've always had this theory that good musicians make good endoscopists. It's a little bit the same. It's that kind of eye-hand coordination, but then there's an interpretive part to it as well. And I don't know if you remember, but I would always start out by asking, are you a musician, when I would begin work with one of the advanced fellows. So there's that, and of course astronomy, you're looking through, well, I guess we don't look through little telescopes anymore, but
What are those?
no, those are gone. So I suppose there is some influence, but by and large it probably is unconnected.
You were a mentor to so many of us, and you started one of the first advanced endoscopy fellowship programs in this country.
Mm-hmm.
Who were your mentors, and how did they influence your career?
It's an interesting thing about what I call legacy. But my most immediate mentor was Ben Sullivan, who was at Cleveland Clinic when I was there, started as a fellow. And at the time, endoscopy was, I guess by modern standard, was pretty primitive. I mean, we were had just come out of the rigid endoscope era.
Candle power?
No, they did have electricity. Although in the early days, I believe the gastro camera, for example, the light bulb was inside the patient, which would be just unacceptable nowadays. But anyway, Ben Sullivan, he had 20 years of service in the Army and rose to the rank of colonel. He had been at Walter Reed. He was John Foster Dulles' physician and so on. And he was interested in endoscopy, and somehow we clicked. Now, the interesting thing about that is the person who taught him endoscopy was a fellow by the name of Eddie Palmer, who was also an Army colonel. And I don't know where Eddie Palmer, I've never met Eddie, and I suppose he's probably deceased now. But so your legacy of training through me goes back through Ben, through Eddie Palmer, and to someone unidentified in the distant past. But Ben knew all of he knew Schindler. Ben was not part of the original 6 or 7 people that formed the American Endoscopy Club, which became ultimately the ASGE in, I think, 1941, but he knew all of those people. So that's pretty much how it started. And I don't know if you want to get into what it was like in 1970-something. To do endoscopy was nothing like it is today. But anyway, that's where it started. What was your other question? The advanced program? Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Peter Cotton. So once upon a time, Peter invited me to London, and he used to have these, what he called courses, I think he called them, which were brief, little sessions, not all that little, but they had a small number of people, probably not more than 10 or 12. And he would do, in the next room, literally, would do endoscopic procedures that were shown on television. Of course, at that time, you put the television camera on the endoscope. So I went and did that. And I always wondered how Peter was running all over the world giving talks and so forth and playing golf. And I wondered how he could keep the store running. And he had, at that time, 3 young men, Tony Spear and some 2 other guys, forgot their names, that were there working for him. And these were not trainees. These were fully functional gastroenterologists that had come to him for some sort of additional training. And I thought to myself, wow, what a great idea. You could get somebody at that level to do all the work for you. But the thing that I did that was different is I formalized it. And at the time, I was at the Cleveland Clinic, and there was much more latitude about the things that you could do. So, and of course the problem was money. If you brought somebody on board, how would you pay them? I'm not sure that Peter, knowing Peter, he probably didn't pay those guys, but I figured out how to pay a salary and formalized it as certain things we wanted to accomplish at least, so that it became a course, and advertised it, and there was no lack of applicants to the program. And pretty much that's how it started.
I don't think I got any salary. Did you get any salary?
I got some, I
Oh,
believe.
okay.
I recall.
Well, she was a woman, and there was
I had my ways.
yeah, protested, yeah.
So it's interesting you say that, because I remember Dr. Doss, who was one of your more favorite trainees, sort of lamented
I
that
have no favorites.
that he felt the age of, sort of all of these great things had sort of maybe
Passed
petered
him
out.
by.
Yeah. So back to your advanced endoscopy fellowship, which
yeah,
is
I knew you were gonna do
near and
this.
dear to your heart.
Yeah.
I know you try to act like you're sort of anti-women and sort of chauvinistic, but we know you have 3 daughters who are all three very career oriented.
Yeah, all overeducated.
And so we know that's really not true. That's just your little persona that you try to keep up. But tell us about women in advanced endoscopy, because
How
we've
they
had a
got
number
in.
of them in our
How they
program
got
now.
in.
How they
Yeah,
got in,
yeah,
right?
There's 3 of them, right?
No, there's more.
There's
There's a parent after me. Well, that he trained 3.
yeah, it's important to emphasize the program
Yes,
still goes on here at
Right.
university hospitals, yes. It got up to the point that I was getting as much as 40 or 50 applicants for the program. And it was difficult. You couldn't interview 40 or 50 people, and they all seemed qualified, but you had to make some cut. But I would interview as many as up to 10, from the pool of applicants. And along comes this little girl from Johns Hopkins, Mimi Canto. And of course, the interviewees are always ready for all of the standard questions, and I would have a list of every question I could think of that wasn't standard, like, well, what do you do in your spare time? But anyway, so I sat back and I said, little girl, why do you want to do this? And she said, and her neck went way up and her eyes got really big, and she said, oh, I want to be just like you. And there I said, okay, kid, you're in. You're in.
So you used to ask them also, did they have the fire in the gut, right?
Yeah, the FIG principle, the fire
FIG,
in the
right.
guts. Yeah, the fire in the guts. Yeah, where do you get this stuff? I didn't even remember that.
Yes, it's passed on from women to women.
Yeah, I guess.
I think one of the things is that I think you were the first pregnant fellow.
Oh, I never even
to-
thought how to
to
deal with
get
that.
in.
Yes.
I think I was the
Yes.
first internal candidate to get in, right?
Maybe.
That may be right. Yeah, I don't know.
Because you took fellows from outside the program.
Oh,
Not
yes.
that the
Yeah.
Cleveland Clinic didn't have their
Yeah.
choice guys, but
Yeah.
you like to go outside.
I honestly tried to pick the person I thought had the most fire in the guts, but would also follow the idea of endoscopic research, such as it was. We're trying to build the idea of endoscopic research. And that was an important one. So I tried to sense if they would do quote-unquote academics or make some sort of contribution. And in that, I think, looking back, I was successful mostly, but not always. Not that they all haven't made, they've all become accomplished physicians, endoscopists, et cetera. But some more than others stuck to the academics, you two, for example.
How did you get interested in endoscopic research? I mean, how did you learn how to do research?
You got to go way back. One of the reasons, I guess, why the ASGE was formed is that endoscopy way, way back, we're talking 40s, 50s, even 60s, endoscopy was sort of the poor stepchild of gastroenterology because it was nothing like it is today. And it just didn't get the respect it deserved, I thought. And
Still doesn't.
Well, maybe not, but of course now it's a much, much bigger part of gastroenterology. But at the time it was, small potatoes. And the people that did it were derided to some degree by the more intellectual gastroenterologist. And so that's kind of the origin of the split. I mean, the logic of why ASGE exists is not there. So it goes back to politics and people's attitudes and so forth, I think way, way back in distant history. I started in the early 70s sensing that was the case. And I had the idea that, we should make this mainstream medicine. I mean, we should study how we do things, why we do things, does it really work? And of course, there was a lot of, at the time, the IRBs were not nearly so strong as they are today, and you did some things because they were logical, not that you knew that they, or you thought they were logical anyway, not that you knew that they were right. And I thought this just wasn't the right way to go, that we should try to figure out how things work. Are the things we're doing really worthwhile? One example of this, by the way, is colonoscopic polypectomy. The technique of that, developed by Hiromi Shinya, and the guy that actually made the first snare, electrosurgical snare, was Hiroshi Ichikawa. And they diagrammed the idea out on the back of a envelope that you got your sterile rubber gloves out of. And I think Hiroshi still has the little diagram that they made how they would do this. And everybody told him, no, don't do this. I think Hiroshi at the time was working for Olympus Company, and they said, no, this is too dangerous. But they went ahead and did it. But the thing about that is they were able to do it well before there was any reasonable proof that polyps were the forerunners of cancer, and that if you went and got the thing and removed it, you were really doing the patient some good. So that's just an example of about how things kind of developed. It wasn't all in a logical order. It was more fire-ready aim, so to speak. And but then after that, John Bond and all those guys, the National Polyp Study finally, nailed it that polyps were indeed the forerunners of colon cancer. So, but that's how things went on at that point. Sclerotherapy was another one that had first been done about 1939, if I remember correctly. And now, I mean, it's you don't think about this, but at the time the question was, well, if we did shunt surgery, could we save people from dying of variceal bleeding and so on and so forth? And it was a real problem because these poor people would be in the ICU for weeks and weeks, and they'd bleed, they'd stop bleeding, they'd bleed, eventually their liver would deteriorate. It was just a downhill, disastrous, costly, agonizing spiral. So there was 2 or 3 of us that resurrected sclerotherapy and figured out how to do it through an endoscope. And it was miraculous because you could spot the bleeding point and you could stick the needle in there and it stopped. But there was no randomized controlled trial showing that that was a good thing to do. And of course, had there been, we might have realized that, well, it works okay, but there's some bad things that could happen. And then, of course, along came banding, which was a riff on the same idea. We go and find the bleeding point, we stop it. But that's how things were in the 70s. So going back to your question, I just thought, well, we should be able to apply scientific methods to how endoscopy is done and why we do it and so forth. Long answer. Did I answer your question? I hope I got it in there somewhere.
So I know that you think that endoscopic polypectomy is probably the best contribution to
absolutely
endoscopy.
Yes.
For patients.
Yeah. I mean, it's a close race, but I would say in terms of what did we do good for humanity, GI, I would say that's right up there.
and second was taking out or treating cholangitis via ERCP, saving patients.
That is equally dramatic. I mean, I didn't have all that much to do with it. But the people that did, I mean, that's also the reason that polypectomy outranks that is there's way more colon cancer than there is cholangitis.
So you've made some significant contributions with sclerotherapy. You and Charlie Lightdale, I believe, were one of the people that brought endoscopic ultrasound from Japan to this country. You've made a lot of contributions with ERCP. You've had a career invested in endoscopic technologies, including optical coherence tomography. What's your proudest contribution?
Well, EUS was very interesting. Olympus came to us, that is me and Charlie. We were the first two people, I think, in the Western Hemisphere to do EUS, and there weren't all that many people in the Eastern Hemisphere for that matter. Charlie, I think, is still out there practicing. I don't know what in the hell is wrong with him, but he's still out there. But yes, and Olympus had no idea about EUS, although it's sort of logical. I mean, to marry ultrasound with endoscopy, but they came and there was this Mack truck sort of instrument. I wish we had a picture of some of this stuff. And we had no idea what to do with it. Now, Charlie being smarter than me, he decided I will study the esophagus. I mean, that was brilliant. Straight shot, you can get it in there. You can. Me, like an idiot, I'm thinking, wow, we could see the pancreas, I bet, with this thing, which is, of course, much harder. So at the clinic, not knowing all that much about ultrasound, I did get a stack of books and started reading. But I got a guy from the radiology department by the name of Craig George, persuaded him to work with me on this. So we scrounged up a kind of crazy IRB to cover us, so to speak. But the problem with Craig George, he was a big guy, and the display unit was this refrigerator-sized thing that took 2 men and a boy to just push it in the room, with this tiniest little screen. And Craig George, being a big guy with a big head, his head was in front of that. I couldn't. And so we developed a system of hand signals. So he'd go like this or like that, and I'd try to follow this, and every now and then he'd stick his head out of the way and we'd see something. And I think you had to do a screen shooter, that is. There was no automatic pictures. You flipped the thing in front of the screen with an old Polaroid or something like that and took a picture. But we succeeded in ultimately finding the pancreas. We didn't hurt anybody. I'm not sure we helped anybody, but that's the way that started. So EUS, yes. Of all the things, though, you want me to put it in some rank order, I think the most dramatic to me, and probably one of my entrees into the upper echelon of television personalities in endoscopy, was sclerotherapy. I remember presenting in Chicago. We had made a videotape of this. We didn't need no science, because we had a videotape of blood pouring out of a varix, and we made the videotape by clamping an Aeroflex camera onto and it was a 16 millimeter camera, which would much better than quality-wise than an 8 millimeter, but it was extremely heavy. And so Ben Sullivan was standing there holding the camera while I'm going after this varix that's pouring out blood. Probably not in the best interest of the patient, but sure enough, I got the needle in, and the varix is spurting, and all of a sudden it stops. And I showed this in Chicago, and that was enough. So it wasn't the best thing. Banding obviously was better, but you got to realize at the time what was happening with these patients. And even though we didn't save any lives ultimately, we certainly saved the blood bank and and some other resources, and we maybe made their demise a little easier. The distal spinal renal shunt trial, I forgot the guys that did that. Some were women, I'm sure. Came out later, and lo and behold, I hope I'm remembering all of this correctly. The result of the study was they didn't save anybody either. They just changed the mode of death. But of course, it was much more involved, costly, and more difficult than just doing sclerotherapy. But then along came banding. Jeff Goff and big tall surgeon from Denver. Oh my God, he's going to really give me hell for not remembering his name. He was one of our editors. Oh, it'll come to me. I'm old and I have a license to forget. So, but anyway, banding came along, and of course that just nailed it. We were in business. But anyway, yes, I would put that up there because you have to, if you put it in the context of what we did at the time, that was, I think, really gratifying, if that's your question. Okay, I'll try to make the answer shorter.
No, that's fine. Okay, so changing gears a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, now in this day and age, most trainees use the internet.
Yeah. To what?
Yeah. A little,
Yeah, okay.
little thing called the internet.
Yeah.
You know, where we look up a lot of information.
Yeah,
We don't use
yeah,
textbooks
yeah,
as much.
yeah.
But you were, you know,
Yeah. Oh,
wrote the
textbook.
authoritative
Yeah.
book on GI endoscopy.
Yeah.
Sort of what motivated you to do that and at the time?
It was not by any means the first textbook, but it was the first comprehensive textbook that I tried to put everything in there. And part of it was just an effort to see if it could be done. Excuse me, my allergies are just an effort to see if it could be done. And I got good response from a lot of people. And the other thing, there was an editor. The clinic had its own sort of editorial department at that time. And there was a lady by the name of Rita Farron, and she did a lot. I was a pretty good writer to begin with, but she did a lot to help perfect my editing skills. And she said, and she, I believe, brought to me the editor from Saunders, who was looking for something to do, or looking for people to write books, I guess. And she brought him over, and she said, if you do it, I will help you. And what she meant by that was to do the editing from the standpoint of English and punctuation and grammar, etc. So it was one of those spur of the moment, well, not exactly spur of the moment, but almost spur of the moment decisions. And it was partly to see if we could set everything all down. And going back to this, we were second-class citizens in gastroenterology. I thought, wow, we can strike a blow for the underclass here. So all of that went into it. And of course, it was a lot harder than I thought. But Rita Farron was her name. I believe she's probably deceased now. And so that's how I got into editing.
So you've had many hats throughout your career,
Yeah.
Including an Indian's hat, but one of which has been the...
We came so close so many times.
Yes.
Leroy Satchel Page. I don't remember him. I was too young, but you know,
Maybe
Leroy
sometime in
Page.
your life.
Leroy Page. Don't look back. Something may be gaining on you. Leroy knew what he was talking about. Okay, I'm sorry. What did you say?
So many of these hats have been worn by you,
Yeah.
including the textbook that you talked about,
Yeah.
and the other being chief of the division, also editor for gastrointestinal endoscopy for many years.
Yeah.
At that time, you were quite busy. You had just finished, I believe, the textbook that you had written. You were
Yeah.
trying to grow at the division at university hospitals, and then you decided to take on this additional position as editor for GIE.
Yeah.
What led you to go after that?
Just out and out stupidity, I guess. I don't know. The guy that succeeded me was, again, Charlie Lightdale. Our careers have intersected in so many ways. You guys are bringing back memories. He had been the editor before me, and Rena Lightdale, his wife, was the managing editor. So there was a formula there. And but you're asking me why. I guess I had finished up pretty much everything I could do in the ASGE except that. And again, it was in part wondering if I could do it, you know, and so on. And I always wanted to be the captain of an Iowa-class battleship. But there are no more Iowa-class battleships. And being the editor is kind of like being the captain. You know, I'm the editor, and whatever I say goes. I don't know. I was drunk with power or something.
I think Mike Wallace says the same thing.
Yeah, I can't exactly explain it. But of course, my wife Donna, she became the assistant editor, and we did a lot of expansion. I'm not sure we did everything as fast as the ASGE wanted it. But the one thing I'm proud of is we did try to stick to our editor principles as best we could, and it's not easy. I'm sure there's a lot of guys out there who hate me for rejecting their stuff, and there may be some girls too. You haven't asked me how women got into the advanced training program.
I don't understand either. But
Well, it was. We can come back to that, but I guess I don't have a good answer for why I became the editor of the journal.
So how did you become involved with the ASGE, and what to you was the most important role of the
Most
you were
important
proud of
role,
with the
yeah.
ASGE?
Okay. Well, my mentor Ben Sullivan, he had been president of the ASGE. He was a Schindler, one that had gotten the Schindler Award, and he always talked about it. But when I started as a staff member at the Cleveland Clinic, I didn't have anything to do with it. But Steve Silvas, by the way, Steve Silvas had a textbook before I had a textbook, but it wasn't as comprehensive as mine, but it was a good book. And I stole stuff out of that, not directly steal, but I used ideas. So anyway, to give Steve credit. But he was president of the ASGE. So I wrote him a letter, which I still have, and I said, "Dear Steve," or "Dear Dr. Silvas," since I was really a junior guy, I know a lot. I do teaching every day. I know a lot about teaching. I think that I should be on the education committee. Would you give me a job? And he did. And that's when I met Lauren Pitcher, who also president of the ASD. And Lauren Pitcher was one of these Army colonels of Colonel Ben Sullivan's network. And there were others like Worth Boyce, and these were all really high-class people and like role models. And Lauren Pitcher was chairman of the education committee, and he sort of brought me along. The next thing I knew, I was chairman of the education committee, and the next thing I knew, I was secretary-elect, and so on and so on, and went on from there.
So you've seen many changes throughout your career.
Yeah.
What in particular did you see with the ASGE?
Well, the obvious thing is growth. I mean, I think probably one of the most important things we did, and this was Fran Tedesco's idea. I don't know if you two even know him, but he decided that we needed to save money and invest, pretty much was what it was. And we had no idea how to do that. But Jim Borland had some finance sense. So in addition to the growth, we started saving money and we invested it. I remember the stock market crash of '87. We had a conference call and we suddenly realized what fiduciary responsibility is. Do you know what that means? That means if you lose all the money and you're not insured or protected, or as officers, the membership can sue you. So I remember the conference call, and the question was whether we should sell, and then things are dropping like a stone, but we didn't. And at that time, we had I was on the committee that selected our money manager, I guess you would call it. And his name was Robert Appel from Neuberger Berman in New York. And but anyway, that all turned out to be very successful. But I think far and away was the growth. We had problems, I think, not like they have now, but they're problems, a problem, you know, that sort of thing. But it was the growth. The other thing that it was then was a kind of a good old boys club, not exactly, but and I don't say boys to mean women were excluded, although we did exclude them a little bit. That's not true entirely, but it was a little bit like that, because at the time when I started, only 6% of the gastroenterologists were women.
Now it's apparently up to 23%.
23% and growing, yes, which is all good. You haven't asked me how women got into the advanced program, but I can tell you that.
We're going to get to that.
Going to get to that. But I would think it's just the growth. And the other thing that happened, of course, and this parallels my career, is a lot of the really big stuff happened from about 1975 through 85, 90. And even wrote an editorial before I retired. It's in GUT about how I thought things had risen so rapidly. It was like every year is what's the next great thing. So there was the PEG, there was EUS, ERCP came along, and then all of the therapeutic ERCP. It was just, the door was just opening. All of these things were developed in that kind of period, and I thought that was probably going to be looked back at historically as the golden age, so to speak, when things really developed. So there was all of that, and the ASGE promoted that, and people realized it's getting bigger and bigger, and there is something to this. And we had all sorts of theoretical discussions about it's becoming more and more like surgeons. Aren't we really like surgeons? And the truth is, it's become its own sort of thing. But all of that happened during that period.
So, we've amassed a number of quotes of
the quotes.
The wisdom that you've passed on in short
I don't even
blurbs.
remember I said some of this stuff.
Well, it's kind of passed on through the generations, and people who've never met you know of these things.
Heard of these things.
Do you remember some that were
they come back to me,
your favorites that are the best?
Yeah. Well, I don't know what's the best. You're the judge of that.
We've passed a number of them on to our fellows.
Yes. I think our fellows have learned what we've learned from you, and one of them being that intimidation and sarcasm, and I'm misquoting
you have
this,
to. You are misquoting. You have to understand the teaching value of sarcasm, ridicule, and intimidation. It works. It's very good.
So
where did you learn anatomy? Where did you take anatomy lessons?
Where did you go to medical school?
Where did you go?
Others were you're a fond quoter of famous people like Clint Eastwood.
Oh yeah, my favorite sociologist. Yeah,
Are you feeling lucky today?
Yeah, if you're going to do that, you got to ask yourself one thing: do I feel lucky?
And then the other one that I like is Voltaire's quote, which is "Perfect is the enemy of good." And why do you say that?
Because it's true.
and give us a context.
I guess I was probably a pretty good teacher of endoscopy. Endoscopy is there's an old skit, and I think he put it on record by Bob Newhart called "The Driving Instructor," and and that's what it's like teaching endoscopy. You've got this enthusiastic young person behind the wheel of a 2,000-pound car with 400 horsepower, and you're sitting there trying to control things with your tongue, pretty much. And that's what it's like, kind of teaching endoscopy. He has a line in there, Bob Newhart, about speaking to his predecessor, who's somehow been injured, and he says, "And how fast were you going when you jumped out, or where were you when you jumped out of the car going 60 miles an hour?" And he said, "In the driveway," or something like that. But anyway, so there's that problem. The second thing about teaching endoscopy is, 90% of everything is half mental. And so you've got to get inside the head of the student. And basically they fall into aggressive, overconfident, and shy, timid, and overly cautious, more or less at the kind of the two extremes. So some of the verbal stuff is designed to get them out of whatever that is. And but that is almost all the battle, mental. You don't know who said 90% of everything is half mental.
It's Yogi Berra.
Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra, yes. Baseball is a source of wisdom. You've got to realize that. Yes, okay. Okay.
So, do you have any thoughts on endoscopic training and how it's changed over time? I mean, I know we've sort of given
It's
you a
still
little glimpse
basically the
into-
driving lesson. It gets down to the basics. The secret to teaching somebody to be a really good endoscopist is colonoscopy. I think, well, as you know, one of my quotes, every colon has its own personality, and live by the loop, die by the loop, that sort of thing. But to really understand how an endoscope, my other favorite, the fellows reminded me the other day, is Zen and the Art of Archery. There is a book by a German guy, I forgot his name, from the 30s, about a famous Japanese archer that could hit a target blindfolded and so forth. And but it's this sort of man-machine kind of interaction, and that's kind of what it is with an endoscope. And some people can make that thing do things better than others. That's another insight for endoscopy training. There's some people can do this, and other people aren't so good at it. Everybody can learn the basics, but to be really a virtuoso with an endoscope takes a little bit of special talent.
So another quote or another saying that you used to tell us.
Where are you getting that stuff?
Was that if we were to know the secret of endoscopy, we would have to get to the mountaintop, and you would be fond of talking about some place in Japan, but you couldn't tell us just yet.
Oh, that story.
And of course, what advice would you give to people who want to develop a career in gastrointestinal endoscopy?
Well, the first question is, do you want to really go into medicine? I'm ambivalent about that. As you know, my oldest daughter is a orbital surgeon. But anyway, I never advised her one way or the other whether she should do that. And so that's the first question. I think if knowing what I know now, I might not have gone into knowing the way medicine is now and the way it's going and the difficulties. And I suppose there's always been complaints and everything. But so that's the first question. You really have to have the fire in the guts, damn the torpedoes, I'm going to do this. So once you get that, I think part of the question, like me sitting in the library at Philadelphia General trying to figure out which direction to go, part of the question is, for any individual, is what do you think your natural abilities are? And getting back to this, am I good with my hands? Could I be some sort of surgical kind of thing? Another one is, do I really like talking to people or listening to people's problems, you know? And by the way, my answer was no, I don't. I'm actually okay with that, but I've learned to do it. But no, I don't really like it. That's kind of the first thing is, what do you think your natural aptitudes are? And, and then you make yeses and nos, endoscopy, no endoscopy, yeses and nos, and you make lists, and then logically you get down to, and you throw all of that out, and you do what you feel like you want to do. You might make a mistake, but the other question is, well, where's it going? Like when I was with Ben Sullivan, and we had those crude one-way deflection. You had to pump the air in with a sphygmomanometer bulb, and you had a syringe to wash. I mean, it was not all that, but I knew, I somehow just knew this is going someplace. So that's another question. Do we really think endoscopy is going someplace? And of course, one of the issues there is the academic mission, the developmental sort of mission, which is under stress right now, no doubt about it. Institutions, the people that run healthcare today don't understand this. So one of the issues is this a growing field, or should I go into gene splicing or something like that? But all of those things go into it, and you really can't, only an individual can answer that. Anyway, as I said, I don't really get into this because you just don't know how to tell people what to do. But those kinds of things, and but after you get done making all the lists and everything, it comes down to either you like it or you don't like it, you know.
I think, it's interesting. I work with the medical school every year, and we have a panel when medical students ask us to please help them choose what to do. It's sort of my sense. And, I always found that it was the people who I met, and you and Amitabh Chak, who sort of led me into going into GI and endoscopy. And I think that, you're the people that sort of form our ideas about how we want to be and what kind of career we
and
want.
I left that out. You're very astute, as usual. Role models. It's probably plays a bigger influence than anybody knows, all through your education. Role models. And Mimi Canto, I want to be just like you. Okay. That kind of thing, role models. Yeah, no doubt about it. Thank you for filling that in.
Well, I think you always had high standards.
Yeah,
I think that's what I admired most about you. Is that you
integrity.
Yes,
integrity.
And it was very important to you to pass those on to your trainees.
I looked for that. In people.
So, you've had an amazing career. One that I think many people would say is one of the most ambitious careers anybody could have. You've, as I said, worn all these hats that few people who have just one hat, and you've worn most of these.
Yeah, thank you.
What's your proudest
thing?
Besides your
professional
kids.
career,
Besides your kids.
The kids, proudest thing. Oh my gosh. Well, I played second clarinet in the Morgantown Municipal Band. I'm pretty proud of that.
I thought it was us.
You want me to say which is the most successful of the advanced trainees?
Those are Gerard's question.
I really don't. People have been after me to say who was the best fellow I ever had, and there really isn't one. If I could make a composite, I would take something from this person and that person and put them together. There were some that were smarter. There were some that were more adept. There were some that were not so adept. There were
Some that took 2 years.
yeah. Well, no, Mimi. When I left the clinic to take the chief job here, I didn't want to leave poor Mimi in the lurch because she had started at the clinic. So I said, "You can have 2 years if you want to come over to UH." So and she did. So. So I know you're trying to get me to say, yeah, well, poor Mimi, it took me 2 years to get her to 1 year, but no, she's pretty smart. But all of them, and again, this is like getting into the head of the trainee. All of them had strengths and weaknesses, just like everybody else.
So we'll accept your answer that it was your trainees that you're most proud of in your career.
If you asked me now that I'm retired, what do I miss the most?
Okay.
It's interaction with my colleagues and what I call the trainees or the students. Yeah, that's you guys. I don't know if I could do it anymore. The millennials scare me, so I don't know if I could, if the old methods would still work. Maybe.
Well, thank you once again,
Oh, you're
Dr. Sivak,
welcome.
for coming and speaking
You're
with us.
very welcome. I'm glad both of you turned out so well. And I'm not surprised, but
Thank you.
Thank you again.
you're welcome.